The morning my daughter told me to leave her wedding, I was wearing my good suit. The navy one I'd had dry cleaned twice because she'd mentioned once, years ago, that she liked how I looked in it. I remember standing in the parking lot of the Hargrove Club, straightening my tie in the reflection of my truck window, thinking, today's going to be a good day. Today, whatever happened between us, we set it aside. Today, I watched my little girl become a wife. I was wrong about a lot of things that evening, but I was most wrong about that. My name is not important. What I did for 31 years is, I was a structural engineer. Not the kind who sits in an air-conditioned office drawing lines on a screen, though I did plenty of that too. I was the kind who put on a hard hat and walked job sites in January, who signed off on load-bearing calculations for hospitals and bridges and, as it turned out, a private event venue in Claremont Hills that a certain family now wished had never been built. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, even now, even after everything. Her name is Vivian. She's 31. She has her mother's eyes, and I used to think, my stubbornness. Turns out I was wrong about that too. What I mistook for stubbornness was something else entirely. Something that only showed its full shape the night of her wedding to a man named Theodore Ashworth III. Yes, the third. That should have told me something. Vivian and I had always been close when she was small. After the divorce, she was 9, her brother was 6. She chose to live with her mother in Scottsdale, which was her right and I never argued it. I drove 4 hours every other weekend for 11 years. I never missed a birthday. I sent cards, called every Sunday, flew up for school plays and graduations, and the time she broke her wrist in a soccer tournament and nobody thought to tell me until 3 days later. I did what divorced fathers do when they're determined not to become a statistic. I showed up. When she told me she was engaged to Theodore, I was sitting in my kitchen in Claremont Hills eating leftover chili. She called on a Tuesday night. She sounded happy in a way I hadn't heard in a while. Nervous happy, like she was waiting for me to say the wrong thing. I didn't say the wrong thing. I said congratulations and I meant it. Then she told me about the venue, the Hargrove Club, a private event space that had been in operation since 1987. Beautifully restored Mediterranean-style building, 2 ballrooms, manicured grounds, membership-only access. The kind of place that costs $12,000 just to rent for a Saturday. I said, that's a beautiful choice. She said, I was hoping you might help with some of it. Financially, I mean. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Over the next 8 months, I contributed $42,000 toward Vivian's wedding. I wrote checks without being asked twice. Catering, florals, photography, the string quartet for the ceremony. I didn't ask for a guest count breakdown or a seating chart. I didn't ask for anything except to be kept in the loop. I was not kept in the loop. I found out about the venue restriction from my ex-wife, Sandra, 3 weeks before the wedding. She called me on a Thursday evening, which was unusual because Sandra and I only spoke when we had to. She sounded uncomfortable. There's something you should know, she said. Theodore's family, they've made some requests about the guest list. What kind of requests? About who's seated where. And whose? She paused. Who's formally invited to the reception. I didn't understand at first. I'm invited to my own daughter's wedding. To the ceremony, Sandra said carefully. You're invited to the ceremony. I sat with that for a moment. The ceremony. Not the reception. Not the dinner, the dancing, the toasts. Just the 20-minute church service. And then, presumably, I was expected to go home. I asked Sandra to repeat herself. She did. I asked if Vivian knew about this. Sandra was quiet for a moment. She agreed to it, Victor. I'm sorry. Theodore's mother was very insistent. She said the reception was, I'm quoting here, a curated experience for close family and the Ashworths' social circle. Curated experience. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The refrigerator hummed. I looked at the framed photo on my counter. Vivian at 7 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade, cotton candy in both hands, laughing so hard her eyes were closed. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself I wouldn't call Vivian, that I'd wait for her to come to me, to explain, to apologize for not telling me herself. I waited a week. She didn't call. So I called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. She sounded guarded immediately, which meant Sandra had told her I knew. Dad. I'd like to understand, I said. I kept my voice even. 31 years of engineering teaches you to stay calm when the numbers don't add up, and you need to find out why before the structure fails. Help me understand what's happening with the reception. There was a long pause. Theodore's family is very private, she finally said. The reception is really more of an Ashworth event. It's formal, it's curated, Vivian. And I just think it would be better for everyone if the ceremony was your part, and then maybe we do a separate dinner afterward, just us, and Vivian. I said her name again, quieter this time. I gave $42,000 toward this wedding. I'd been to every school event, every graduation, every "Dad, please don't make this about money." Something shifted in my chest. Something I don't quite have a word for. Not anger. More like the ground moving slightly underfoot. I'm not making it about money, I said. I'm telling you that I love you and I want to be at your wedding. Your whole wedding. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll talk to Theodore, she said. But her voice had already gone careful and distant, the way it does when someone is telling you what you want to hear instead of what's true. She didn't talk to Theodore. Or if she did, Theodore talked to his mother. And his mother's answer was no. I know this because I received a formal note, an actual note, written on Ashworth family stationery with a small embossed crest, from Theodore's mother, a woman named Constance. The note thanked me for my generous financial support of the couple and expressed hope that I would understand the intimate nature of the reception. It was 3 paragraphs long and it never once used my name. It referred to me as Vivian's father throughout, like I was a category rather than a person. I read it twice. Then I put it in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus. Then I made a phone call of my own. You see, there's something I haven't mentioned yet, something I probably should have mentioned earlier but didn't, because I wanted you to understand exactly what kind of man I was, before I tell you about the kind of man I became that Saturday evening. The Hargrove Club was built in 2003. The original structure, the ballrooms, the event wings, the underground utilities, was designed and overseen by my firm. I spent 14 months on that project. I know where every load-bearing wall is. I know the original blueprints down to the HVAC routing. More relevantly, when the club went through a change in management in 2019, the new board reached out to several local professional figures to join as founding members of the refreshed club community. It was largely a civic gesture. Engineers, architects, a couple of physicians. We paid our membership fees, attended the occasional event, got our names on a small bronze plaque near the main entrance. I'd been a member of the Hargrove Club for 6 years. The wedding was booked at my club. I called the club's general manager, a steady professional woman named Helen, on a Thursday afternoon. I explained the situation without editorializing. I told her that I was a dues-paying member in good standing, that my daughter's reception was booked on the premises, and that I had been formally excluded from attending by the family of the groom. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Caldwell, members in good standing, have guest and access rights to all events held on club property, unless they've been formally restricted by club management. Has any such restriction been filed regarding you? Not that I'm aware of. Then as far as we're concerned, she said, you have every right to be here. I thanked her and hung up. I want to be clear about something. I didn't make that call out of spite. I made it because I had spent 8 months helping pay for an event I was being erased from. and I needed to know whether I still had any standing, anywhere, in my own daughter's life. The club gave me an answer when my daughter couldn't. The Saturday arrived cold and clear, the way November mornings sometimes are in Southern California when the Santa Ana winds have passed through and left everything sharp-edged and bright. I dressed carefully. The navy suit, as I said. My good shoes. A tie that Vivian had given me for Father's Day 3 years earlier. Dark burgundy, with a small geometric pattern. I wore it deliberately, not as a statement, just because it was hers, and I still wanted to carry something of her with me. The ceremony was at a small Lutheran church about 2 miles from the club. I sat in the third row on the father of the bride's side. Nobody acknowledged me arriving. Nobody offered me a corsage or a program or a moment with the wedding coordinator. I found my seat myself. Vivian walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. She looked beautiful. She looked like herself at 7 years old, and also like a woman I was still learning to know. When she passed my row, she glanced at me. Just for a second. Something moved across her face that I couldn't read. It might have been guilt, might have been something harder than that. And then she was past me, moving toward Theodore, who stood at the altar looking like a man who had never once in his life been told no. I stayed through the entire ceremony. I did not cry, though I wanted to. I clapped when the officiant announced them husband and wife. I watched my daughter kiss a man I barely knew in a room where I felt like a stranger. And then the other guests began filing up toward cars in the club, and I walked to my truck. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes. Long enough to have the conversation with myself that I needed to have. The one where I asked whether I was sure. Whether I was doing this for the right reasons or just because I was hurt and wanted to prove something. I sat with that question honestly. Here is what I decided. I was not going to cause a scene. I was not going to make my daughter's wedding about me. I was not going to walk into that reception and announce anything or confront anyone. I was going to walk in as a member of that club, sit quietly somewhere appropriate, and be present at my daughter's wedding in whatever small way I still could. That was the plan. The Hargrove Club parking lot was already full when I arrived. I found a spot near the back and walked to the main entrance. The attendant at the door, a young man I didn't recognize, glanced at me and then at his clipboard. Name? Victor Caldwell, I said. I'm a club member. He checked the list. I could see from where I stood that my name was not on it. He looked up at me with the careful expression of someone who has been trained to handle these moments without escalating them. Sir, this event is a private reception. I'm only authorized to admit guests on the approved list. I understand, I said. I'm also a member of this club. Would you mind checking with Helen or one of the senior staff? He hesitated. One moment. He stepped inside. I waited on the stone steps, looking out at the parking lot, at the string lights that were just beginning to glow in the early evening, at the cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I straightened my tie. The attendant came back with a woman I didn't recognize, and behind her, moving quickly in the way she moved when she was agitated, was my daughter. Vivian saw me and stopped. She was still in her dress. Her hair was pinned up, and she looked like someone had just told her something she didn't want to hear, which I suppose was accurate. Dad. Her voice was low. What are you doing here? I'm a member of this club, Vivian. I know that. A pause. She glanced back over her shoulder toward the ballroom, then back at me. I know that, but tonight isn't really. She stopped. Took a breath. Started again. Tonight isn't for you. I thought we talked about this. We did talk about it, I said. You told me you'd handle it. Nobody handled it. Nobody handled it. I received a letter from Constance. Something shifted in her face. Dad, I'm sorry, I know this isn't ideal, but Theodore's family, Vivian. I said her name quietly. Not angry. Not wounded. Just clearly. I've been a member of this club longer than you've known Theodore. I don't need to be on anyone's guest list to walk through that door. A new voice entered the conversation. Smooth, the kind of smooth that comes from private schools and the certain knowledge that things generally work out for you. Is there a problem here, Theodore? He'd come up behind Vivian, one hand on her back, his tuxedo jacket perfectly pressed. He looked at me the way men look at inconveniences, not with hostility exactly, just with the mild impatience of someone for whom other people's problems are categorically less important than their own time. You must be Victor, he said. Not sir, not Vivian's father. Just my first name, like we were colleagues at a networking event. I am, I said. I appreciate your support for the wedding, he said. The word support, like I had donated to a charity. But the reception is a private family event. I think it's best if Theodore. This from Constance, who had materialized to his left. She was a tall woman, beautifully dressed, with the posture of someone who had spent decades being the most important person in any room she entered. She looked at me the way people look at something that has appeared in an unexpected place, not cruel, just assessing. We appreciate everything, she said, and her voice was warm in the deliberate way of someone who has practiced warmth. But tonight is an Ashworth event. Vivian understood that. I looked at Vivian. She was looking at the ground. Vivian, I said. Just her name. Just so she'd look at me. She did, finally. And in her eyes there was something I hadn't expected. Not defiance, not cruelty, but a kind of exhaustion. The look of someone who has been agreeing with people for so long that they've lost track of what they actually think. That almost broke me more than anything else. Vivian, I said, is this what you want? A long silence. Constance shifted beside Theodore. Theodore's hand was still on Vivian's back, and I noticed that she was very slightly leaning away from it. Dad, she finally said, and her voice was quiet. Your money was invited tonight. You weren't. The words landed. I don't know who told her to say that, or whether she thought of it herself. I don't know if she knew, in that moment, what she was really saying. Not just about that evening, but about everything. About the 11 years of weekend drives, about the chili in my kitchen on a Tuesday night, about the burgundy tie I was wearing that she'd given me as a gift. I stood there on those stone steps for a moment. Just stood there. Then I said, all right. I turned and walked back inside past the attendant, who stepped aside without a word. I went to the front desk and asked for Helen. They called her, and she appeared within 2 minutes, professional and composed. Mr. Caldwell, she said, is everything all right? I need to speak with you about the event tonight, I said. As a member. We stepped into her office. It was a small room off the main corridor, simply furnished. She offered me a seat. I sat. I explained calmly and without theater what had just transpired. I told her about the $42,000. I told her about the letter on Ashworth Stationery. I told her what my daughter had said on the front steps. Helen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I want to make sure I understand your position. Are you requesting to be formally admitted to the event as a member? No, I said. She waited. I am requesting, I said slowly, that the event review my member account and the outstanding agreements related to this booking, specifically whether the contracted financial guarantees, which include a portion contributed by a member in good standing, are subject to any conditions I was not made aware of at the time of contribution. Helen blinked. Just once. She was good at her job. You're asking whether your financial contribution to this booking carries any member rights. I'm asking, I said, whether someone who helped fund an event at this club, as a member of this club, was entitled to full disclosure of the conditions of that event before the funds were accepted. Helen picked up her phone. She made a quiet call I wasn't meant to fully hear. Then she set it down and looked at me. Mr. Caldwell, she said, it would be our position that a member's contribution to any club-hosted event creates a reasonable expectation of access disclosure. We take that seriously. I appreciate that, I said. What would you like us to do? I thought about it. I thought about Vivian on the steps in her dress. I thought about the exhaustion in her eyes. I thought about Theodore's hand on her back and how she leaned away from it. Nothing tonight, I said. Don't disrupt the event. Let them have their evening. Helen nodded slowly. But I'd like to formally document this conversation, I said. And I'll be following up about the booking terms and my member contributions through the appropriate channels. Of course. I stood up. I shook her hand. I walked back down the main corridor of the club, past the plaque near the entrance where my name sat in small bronze letters among a short list of others. I stopped and looked at it for a moment. Then I walked out to my truck. I drove to a diner about 3 miles away called Patty's Place that I'd been going to since before Vivian was born. I ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie, and I sat in a corner booth and I looked out the window at the street. My phone buzzed twice. Sandra, I didn't answer. It buzzed a third time, a number I didn't recognize. Theodore's, it turned out, as I'd learned later. I didn't answer that either. I ate my pie. The coffee was too strong, the way it always was at Patty's, the way I'd always liked it. The couple in the booth across from me were having a quiet argument about directions. An old man 3 seats down was doing crossword puzzle. Everything was ordinary and calm and mine. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the girl on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade, and I thought about the woman on those stone steps. And I tried to hold both of them at the same time without deciding which one was more true. Here's what happened afterward, because I know that's what you're wondering. 3 days after the wedding, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Vivian. She didn't say hello. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I let that sit for a second. "Tell me what happened," I said. She talked for almost 40 minutes. She told me about the months of pressure from Constance, the gradual reshaping of the wedding from something she'd wanted into something the Ashworths had approved. She told me about the conversations where she tried to push back and what had happened to her when she did. She told me that she convinced herself, slowly and with a lot of help, that my absence from the reception was for my own benefit, that I wouldn't have been comfortable, that it wasn't really my crowd, that she was protecting me. She said that she knew, even as she was saying it on the steps, that she was wrong. That something in my face when I just said, "all right," and turned around, had cut through everything she'd been telling herself for months. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, "I know you're in a hard situation. I know this isn't simple. I want you to know that I love you, and that is not going to change based on what happened." She cried. Quietly, the way she'd always cried, like she was apologizing for it. "But Vivian," I said, "I need you to hear something. I am not an inconvenience. I'm not a category. I'm your father. And if there are people in your life going forward who treat me like I'm something to be managed rather than someone to be respected, that's going to be a problem, not for their sake, for yours." She didn't say anything right away. "I know," she finally said. "Okay," I said. We talked for a little while longer. About smaller things. About her flight to Napa for the honeymoon. About a cousin's birthday coming up. The conversation found its way to ordinary ground, which was its own kind of relief. About the financial piece. Because I know that's sitting in your mind. I followed up with Helen the following week. I didn't demand a refund. I didn't contact a lawyer, at least not right away. What I did was document everything: the letter from Constance, the timeline of my contributions, the conversation on the steps. Helen's office confirmed in writing that the club's booking policies required disclosure to member contributors regarding event access. The Ashworths were informed of this through club management. Constance did not respond graciously to this information. Theodore was not pleased. There were tense conversations I was not present for, which Vivian described to me later with the particular weariness of someone who has spent her honeymoon fielding phone calls from her mother-in-law. The money was not the point. It was never the point. But having something on paper that said I had been wronged, that I was not invisible, that someone in official capacity acknowledged what had happened, that mattered. Not for revenge. For record. For the simple human dignity of having the facts be known, I still have the burgundy tie. I hung it back in my closet on the Sunday after the wedding, and I haven't worn it since. Not because I don't want to, just because I'm waiting for the right occasion. Something that feels like a beginning rather than an ending. Vivian and I have dinner once a month now. Sometimes Theodore comes, sometimes not. Constance and I have been in the same room twice since the wedding and have exchanged the exact number of words required by basic social functioning. Things are not the same as they were. I don't think they will be, but I am still her father, and she knows it. And some nights when we're sitting at the table together and she laughs at something I've said in the same way she used to laugh at 7 years old, with cotton candy in both hands, I think that's enough. I think that's what I showed up for. I showed up even when I was told not to. That's not nothing, that's everything. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened that night. Not to rehash it or keep score, but to actually understand it. The way you eventually understand something painful once the initial sting has settled into something quieter and more instructive. What I keep coming back to is this. The whole thing was a long chain of small choices. Not one big betrayal, but dozens of smaller ones, each one a little easier to make, because the last one had already been made. Vivian didn't wake up one morning and decide her father didn't matter. She got there gradually, one concession at a time, in a direction she probably didn't even realize she was moving. That's how it usually works. People don't abandon their integrity all at once. They trade small pieces of it, slowly, for comfort or approval or peace in the moment. And by the time they look around, they've traveled somewhere they never meant to go. I'm not absolved of my part in it either. I spent years showing up with my checkbook open and my expectations unstated. I assumed that love would be obvious, that everything I'd done would speak for itself. But love without clearly held boundaries teaches the people around you that you're available without limit, that your presence is a given no matter how you're treated. I taught Vivian, without meaning to, that I could be deprioritized and would still be there. She learned that lesson well. So when Constance reshaped that wedding and Vivian went along with it, they were both, in their own way, operating on what they'd been shown. Constance had spent a lifetime making decisions for others, with no real consequences. Vivian had spent years watching her father absorb whatever came his way. What changed that night on those stone steps was not me making a dramatic stand. It was simpler than that. I stopped absorbing. I said, "All right," and I turned around. And something in that quietness, in that complete absence of argument or begging, landed differently than anything I'd said before. Vivian told me later that it was the "all right" that got her. Not anger, not tears. Just a man recognizing what was being offered to him, deciding it wasn't enough, and choosing to walk towards something better than what he was being given. That's the thing about self-respect that nobody tells you. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make speeches. It just turns around and walks away, and somehow that is louder than anything you could have said. I didn't go to that diner to feel sorry for myself. I went because I was hungry, and it was where I always went, and my life was still mine, even if the evening hadn't gone the way I'd hoped. That ordinary pie and 2 strong coffee were mine. The drive home was mine. Nobody's cruelty or indifference changes what belongs to you internally. But you have to actually claim it. You have to sit down, order the pie, and mean it. The month after the wedding, I started being clearer with Vivian. Not harder, clearer. She knows now where I stand. She knows I will show up. And she also knows I won't disappear quietly into whatever arrangement is convenient for someone else's comfort. That knowledge has made our dinners better. It has made her more honest with me. And I hope, it is slowly making her more honest with herself. That's what I want for her more than anything. Not for her to choose me over Theodore or his family, just for her to know what she actually thinks and to be brave enough to say it. The rest has a way of sorting itself out once that happens.